Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education special meeting. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. Now we'll take attendance. Hi, Travis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Travis Hodges, Student Trustee on the Board of Education.
I'm Laura Bratt. I represent Area 3. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I'm Rachel Hurd. I represent Trustee Area 5.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jesse Van Zee, and I represent Area 1.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm Susanna Ordway, and I represent Area 4.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shelley Clark, and I represent Area 2. Travis, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now I'm going to report on actions taken in closed session. The board voted to approve Rhonda Taft as principal, Twin Creeks Elementary, effective July 1, 2025. Can I have a motion to pass the agenda approval?
Move approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Since this is a special meeting, it's board policy that in order to focus on the items on our agenda, there is no public comment for non-agendized items this evening. Our next regular board meeting will be June 10th. We'll move on to 4.1, consideration of acceptance of the 24-25 third interim budget report. And that will be from Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Danny Hillman, and Executive Director, Evan Miller.
Thank you, President Clark. I'm going to go ahead and read a few of the lines from the cover sheet while Mr. Miller comes down. In a typical school year, districts are required to prepare and submit an interim report to the county superintendent twice a year, a first interim, which contains data through October 31st, and a second interim, which contains data through January 31st, along with a self-certification, which indicates whether the district will be able to meet its financial obligations for the current and 2 subsequent fiscal years. The county superintendent then reviews and certifies the district's budget for the 3 fiscal years. As discussed at the board meeting on April 22nd, the Board of Education submitted its approved second interim financial report timely, including all required disclosures, and presented the current financial condition accurately based upon information available on January 31st, 2025 to the County Office of Education for their review. Based on the county office review, the district was informed of the impact of not achieving the required level of budget reductions. More specifically, without the required reductions, there would be an increase in deficit spending, creating a negative fund balance in the general fund, the depletion of Fund 17, which houses the district's reserves, and the inability to meet the state required reserves of 3%. For those reasons, the Contra Costa County Superintendent of Schools invoked her authority under Education Code 42131A2 to change the district's certification from positive to qualified. A qualified budget certification indicates that the district may not meet its financial obligations for the current and 2 subsequent fiscal years. The County Office of Ed provided specific next steps that the district must comply with under the law, which are: conduct a study of the financial and budgetary conditions of the district, including but not limited to a review of internal controls, and submit a financial projection of all fund and cash balances as of June 30 for the current and subsequent fiscal year. In addition, as required by Education Code 42131, Section 3, districts that have a qualified or negative second interim certification are required to file a third interim report, which is prepared with information through April 30th of 2025. It also includes the following components: average daily attendance, updated budget reports for all funds, a review of cash flow, and an updated multi-year projection. So the reason I wanted to go through all of that is this is a special meeting. You don't typically see us having to do a third interim report, and I wanted to give that context to remind and set the stage for the presentation and the slides that I'm about to go through. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the slides now. And as we look at things here, the agenda tonight looks a little bit different than first and second interim reports. You'll notice that at third interim, the main items for conversation tonight is the general fund summary of revenues and expenditures. We're going to talk about one-time funding. We're going to show the update to the multi-year projection and our historical reserves. There's no self-certification by the board at a third interim report. So the staff is not asking for, and the county is not requiring the board to self-certify this report. That's unnecessary at this point. Based upon where we are in the budget cycle, which is on this next slide here, you can see that when third interim is required, this is where it slots in between second interim and estimated actuals. We will be presenting estimated actuals and adopted budget to the board in June in just a couple of weeks. So the rest of the process and all of the assumptions and everything, we'll have all that full presentation for you in a very short time, just a couple weeks away. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this is because it's required by the county superintendent due to our qualified second interim. It is part of the checks and balances that we're required to do. It includes a review of the current year financials and an updated MYP. The county, after you take action on the third interim report, we send it to the county office. They send it to Sacramento, report it to the California Department of Ed. So here's an update. We use the same format that we used at first and at second interim. You can see what the numbers that we reported back at those time periods. First interim was in December. Second interim was in March. Third interim is there on the screen for you in the white column. And you can see we added a change column. So that's the change from second interim to third. And you can see that there are some small changes there, but for the most part, there's not a lot of huge changes. You can see there with expenditures, pardon me, our revenues, very first line, it's almost exactly what we talked about at second interim. There's a small change there. It seems like a big number, 1.8 million, but 1.8 million on a $460 million budget is less than 0.5% change. Our expenditures overall only changed by about a little over 1%, a small change upward in certificated salaries, a small change downward in our classified salaries. We have a little bit of an uptick on benefits, about 0.75%. And our non-personnel expenditures, so that's basically everything else, went up by about 5%. That's not too uncommon as we come to the end of the year, especially when you approach departments and school principals and say, have you spent all your money for the year yet? And if they haven't, then they start to do that before we have the time period where we cut off purchase orders. New purchase orders can't be filed after a certain point in the year, so we can start the closing of the year. And that typically happens around April. So it's not an uncommon thing to see an increase in non-personnel expenditures as you leave second interim and approach the end of the year. So some other things that have changed since second interim. Enrollment has not. Our enrollment is the same. Average daily attendance ratio has gone up slightly, 0.38%. We'll take every little bit that we can. And then our revenue per student changed a little bit. It is now just over $16,000. Went up about $64 a student since we last spoke to you in March. Next slide. Here's just different revenue categories. You can see that local control funding formula from the state is virtually unchanged. The unrestricted local revenue, facilities use and miscellaneous, virtually unchanged, only $100,000 difference there. Our restricted sped revenue, federal and state combined, a little up, more than $275,000 there. And we did receive a little bit of money. Other state revenue, CYBHI is the California Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. We received a grant there that makes up the large portion of that $788,000. I think it's $680,000. And then our local revenue, this would be any monies collected and dumped into one line from our ed fund, from boosters, site donations, things like that. That went up almost $620,000 since the last time we spoke. So all told, that's how we get to $1.8 million in revenue since March. On the expenditure side, here's how the things break down, either big increases and there's one decrease on there. Certificated personnel, there were some adjustments to special education, so that increased it by $231,000. Classified personnel, primarily from Prop 28, and CSAP went down by 130. Benefit adjustments, health and welfare and pension adjustments, almost $1 million change there, 995,000. Books and supplies, 32,000. Unrestricted services, so LVN support, that's our licensed vocational nurses, transportation services, up by almost 130. Restricted maintenance, CalShape and summer maintenance projects, 3.6 almost $1 million. The lion's share of that number is from CalShape. That's a grant that we received from the Energy Commission, California Energy Commission, to address plumbing and ventilation. And I think that grant amount is like 3.2 million, something like that, 3.4 million. So it's pretty much the entire line is the CalShape grant. External partner services, ed funds, PTAs, site donations, boosters. This is all money going out, 600,000 there. And then we have a kitchen infrastructure upgrade capital outlay. This is all basically to help out child nutrition services, a little over $200,000 there. So the total expenditure line, 5.6 million and change. This is how it breaks down. So restricted one-time carryover funds, we've been reporting this to let people know what we're thinking is going to happen with each of these grants that we have now. Are any of them going to carry over to next year? Here's the results. At second interim, we'd let you know that we'd have about $180,000 in the Universal Pre-K Planning and Implementation Grant. We still believe we'll have $180,000 carrying over to next year. Educator effectiveness, same dollar amount from second interim. It has not changed. We do not anticipate having any funds in the in-person instruction grant carrying over to next year. Classified school employee professional development block grant, still the same amount carrying over, 83,000. In the A to G learning loss mitigation grant, we think we're going to have about 61,000 carry over to next year. That's different from second interim, so we wanted to highlight that. And again, the last two remain unchanged from second interim. That would be the learning recovery emergency block grant. We still think we're going to have 2.9 million to carry over. We'll be using that for staffing positions next year. And then the arts, music, and instructional materials discretionary block grant, that's a mouthful. So that will be completely spent by the end of the year, and we will not have any carry funds for the 25-26 year. Remains unchanged since second interim. Okay, let's look at the MYP. Some of the assumptions that we talked about at second interim, here is what they are for third interim. This chart, I've tried to color code it so that we could reduce the number of numbers on the page. So green means it's improved for the district since second interim. That's what green means. It does not mean that it's gone down or up compared to the other columns that you're seeing. It's comparing to what you saw at second interim. I tried not to show second interim. I'm just showing you the change. So I'm sorry if that's confusing. I was trying to make it simple, and sometimes it doesn't always work out for me. So at any rate, third interim, you can see our ADA, we reflected it here. It went up from 95.5, which was our assumption. It went up to an actual of 95.88. That's good. Like I said earlier, we'll take anything we can get. We also show the LCFF COLA that was just recently confirmed by the governor's May revision, and also the rest of the state and the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office. The COLA did come in at 2.3%. That is slightly better than what we were showing at second interim. I believe we showed a 2.24 or a 2.25 at second interim, so that's good. A little bit helps. The STRS rate remains flat, and the PERS rate improved a little bit. For next year in 25-26, it went down a little bit. That rate, by the way, is the employer, what we, the district, have to pay for every dollar that we that a member in PERS and STRS earns. We have to pay that much more for statutory costs, pensions, et cetera. So 26.9 is a better number than what we showed you at second interim. And then in the year 26-27, I'm sorry that it's red and dark and doesn't show up all that well, but that number is 27.8. It got a little bit worse. Those numbers are going to continue to fluctuate because PERS and STRS invest their funds in the stock market to make sure that the whole pension pool continues to grow money. And so as the stock market fluctuates, those rates fluctuate as well. STRS is fairly flat right now, which is good. I believe STRS requires an act of the legislature to change it, but PERS has its own board and they set their own rates. The other rates or the other numbers on this slide have not changed since second interim. We're still assuming a 1% step in column for both certificated and classified. That's to service the salary schedule as our employees move along the salary schedule with years of service. Okay, here's what the raw numbers look like. This is the MYP. One thing we wanted to make sure was well known is that the MYP does include the $26 million of budget reductions that the board approved back in January. It's a little bit covered up on the slide. I apologize for that, that the box at the bottom, the little note is covering the net increase decrease, but I'll read it off so that it's on the record at the very least. We're still projecting that this year we will have a total revenues of $459 million, that we will have expenditures of $497 million. That leads to deficit spending in the current year of $38.5 million. That next year, $453 million in revenue is what we're expecting. 459 in expenditures. Deficit spending next year would be 6.3 million. So that's an improvement on this year. We go from 38 million down to 6 million in deficit spending. That is a move in the right direction, but we still have deficit spending. And then in the third year out, 26, 27, we see the revenue come back a little bit, 459.9 million in revenue, 463 in expenses, and the deficit spend there is about 3.1. So the deficit spending number is moving in the right direction. That's the direction that you want to be if you want to be fiscally solvent, if you want to show the county that things are getting better and that we're taking the actions we need to take to rein in the spending. So that's what this slide shows. On the next slide, this is the ending fund balance. So when we started this fiscal year in July, we had a beginning ending fund balance, the money left over, $56 million. We're spending 38 million. That's the deficit spend for the year. We will end this year with $17.9 million. If you go to the center section, and it shows up, I think, better on the TVs than it does on the projection screen, the center section that's highlighted in blue is the components of that 17.9 million. And I just want to take a minute and highlight the fact that of the $17.9 million that we anticipate having in our ending fund balance this fiscal year, it ends in June 30th, 17.2 of it is legally restricted. So if you do quick math, 17.9 and you subtract 17.2, that's $600,000 or $700,000 that you've got left over. That's unrestricted. That's available to do something with. That is incredibly low for us. That's incredibly low for most districts. It's really low for us. That's the crux of the problem. We do have, if you continue down in the 24-25 column, we still have in Fund 17 our REU, the Reserve for Economic Uncertainty. That's required to be there. And we have a little bit extra, $3.4 million sitting there. All told, that's the $18 million. That leads to a 3.68 reserve percentage if you add up all those things. The minimum amount we're supposed to have to meet compliance with the state, the checkbox, is 3%. And we're just over that. Next year, 25-26, the ending fund balance will start with 17.9 at the beginning of the year. We'll anticipate next year ending with 11.6. You can see that the restricted amount goes down because we have some deficit spending on the restricted side. It's planned. We're using grant money to do that. And you can see that the assigned amount grows to $2 million. That's a good thing because we have an agreement with most of our employee groups at this point to restore things in 3 years. So we have to start building our reserves back up so that we can restore positions, restore furlough days, etc. And we're going to need money to do that. So that's what you see there in that assigned amount, is that we need to start building it back. So we're going to make an assignment, and we'll talk more about that at budget adoption. We want to earmark it right away. And I flag for the board and for the community as a communication tool what that money is actually for. And so we want to do that right from the start. You'll see that carries over. 26-27, we anticipate starting the year with a fund balance of 11.6 and ending with 8.4. Legally restricted is 4.7, so half of it is still legally restricted, but we're slowly growing that unrestricted amount in the ending fund balance back up. So that's the ending fund balance. I updated this chart from the last time I showed it to you. Essentially, this is historical reserves on the unrestricted side only. This doesn't take into consideration restricted because there's amounts there that are just that. They're restricted. We can only use them on certain things. Unrestricted, we can use on whatever we want. And so again, as I mentioned last time we spoke, there's a lot going on this slide, and I apologize for the denseness of it. But the yellow highlighted column is the year that we are in right now. We anticipate that our expenditures are going to be 490 some odd million. The print is even smaller on my screen than it is on your screen. And you can see that the bar graph, the purple one, is our unrestricted fund balance. It's less than 1%. We anticipate that growing the next 2 years, but it's not growing by a lot. So overall, try to have a picture, try to have a visual to show what the numbers mean and how they are compared to previous years. And that's what this slide is attempting to do, is to show all that in one slide. Okay, we talked about restricted, so let's talk about what is in that dollar amount of $17 million of restricted. These are all the different things that are there. Some of these are grants, some of this is one-time money, some of it's ongoing, but I'll go through each one real quick. The top one there is the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, ELOP. That is an ongoing program. The governor is continuing to propose funding that program from year to year. It's not one-time funding, but we have carryover there of about 1.9 million. Universal Pre-K Planning and Implementation. This is a one-time grant. It's restricted, 180,000. We talked about that a few slides ago. We anticipate that carrying over to next year. Educator Effectiveness Grant, restricted, but also one time. Lottery instructional materials. This is the restricted portion of lottery that can be used on instructional materials. We anticipate having $1.3 million there. Arts and Music in Schools, AMS, this is Prop 28. We have 2.6, almost $2.7 million. That's restricted because it can only be used, I think, as everyone knows, on arts programs and expanding, supplementing current programs. You can't replace programs. The Professional Block Grant for classified employees, we talked about that dollar amount earlier. That's a one-time grant. A to G Learning Loss Mitigation, one-time grant. The California School Employee Summer Assistance Program is an ongoing program. The governor does have that in his budget, and we will have some carryover money there. Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant is one time, and we do have a plan to spend that down. We have, I think, until 2028 to spend that down. Looking at Evan, he's kind of nodding. I think it's 2028 to spend down the Learning Recovery Block Grant. We have some other restricted state dollars. We mentioned this earlier, CYBHI, CTC. So these, again, they're restricted, so they're in this part of the ending fund balance. They have to be set aside. We also have the requirement to set aside at least 3% of our expenditures into routine restricted maintenance. This funds our maintenance department and our grounds department so that we keep up our facilities. And then once again, at the very bottom there, other local restricted funds, Ed Fund, PTA boosters, miscellaneous grants, all here on this one line to try to summarize it for you. And some of those miscellaneous grants are also one time. And that's to the tune of 2.3 million. So all told, these are the items that make up over $17 million of what's in our ending fund balance, and it can't be used on just anything. They have to be used on the items or the services or the employees that the grants were written for. And typically all those rules are coming from the state of California. Okay, so in summary, the third interim report is focused primarily on this current fiscal year. We didn't do a lot of updating for the out years. The governor gave his May revision just a little while ago, but that's just his proposal. And so what comes next is the negotiation with the legislature about what's actually going to become law and be put into the budget for next year. So the MYP is then updated to reflect the new COLA because we know that's solid. We know that that's the number. Everything else is still a proposal, and we didn't try to address that with this presentation. What we focused on with this presentation was what's been the change since second interim, and what kinds of things are we looking at for the current year so that we can report to the county accurately what we said in second interim. Is it coming to pass? Is the trend continuing, or are we seeing something different? I would say by and large, we're seeing the trend continue of what we predicted at second interim is continuing through the rest of the year with some small changes that we just highlighted. So we feel pretty good that the current year, 24-25, is going to end the way that we're saying. It's going to be very close to what we're proposing and what we're projecting. And we feel good about these numbers and about the third interim report. And we're excited to show that to the county to say, we think this is the track that we are on. So revenues and expenditures are tracking as presented. SRVUSD reserves are at their minimum amount and historic lows. We've talked about that. We do not have reserves to withstand a surprise expenditure or tackle an unforeseen problem. That has not changed since second interim. And as I mentioned, we will analyze the governor's May revision and how it will impact the district, but we'll make that part of the presentation on June 10th when you look at the budget adoption for 2025-26. So next steps, I mentioned this a little bit already, but this is the time time of year when the governor and the legislature start to go back and forth and figure out how to meet in the middle, so to speak, and get his proposals and their ideas and their laws that require funding, and they hash all that out. We have our meeting on June 10th. We have to build our budget based upon the best assumptions that we have available at the time. Evan and his team are already doing that. We're already the horses out of the barn, and we're riding to get that work together for you. On June 15th, the legislature has to pass a balanced budget, and the governor has to sign that by June 30th. Any sort of changes or things that were different than what the governor said or was unanticipated or 11th hour changes to proposals, any of that won't be reflected in the budget that our board will be looking at and hopefully voting on June 17th. We always, every year, take care of any changes that come with the state's budget adoption in June 30th at something called the 45-day revise. And for us, that'll probably happen on July 29th. That's the next board meeting for the first board meeting of next fiscal year. And that's when we'll have the majority of the information we need to make any of the tweaks to the budget that we didn't know about when we're giving you the budget on June 10th. This is the normal process. This is what most districts do. Almost every district does it this way if they're public. I think that I wanted to highlight that nuance because this year, because our reserves are so low, we don't have the ability to make an assumption and be wrong. If we assume new revenue is coming and it doesn't come the way we think it's going to come, the 45-day revision when we come back is going to look pretty different, and it might affect our operations. So we have to be very careful in the assumptions that we put into the June 10th and the June 17th budget that you'll be voting on and looking at and studying. And given that the state can still make changes to their budget, we need to be very careful about the things we're committing to in our June adoption of next year's budget. So I just wanted to highlight that because in most years, we can surf that wave. This isn't a year we can really do that. Our reserves are really, really low. So I wanted to highlight that. I wanted to put the date on the calendar and put it on the screen so everyone understands kind of that interplay between the orange lines of what the state does and the white lines on this slide about what we have to do. And so it is unfortunate that state timelines are this way, but we deal with this every year. And we do take the best advice we can get. It's industry standard advice. Places like the Legislative Analyst's Office, School Services of California, FICMAT, who, by the way, was here this week. And we take all of their advice and we put it into the blender. And what comes out is our adopted budget for the proposal we'll be making to you in June. So I wanted to highlight that for anybody that's tuning in for the first time or needs a fresh reminder on that. I think this year it's even more important to highlight those details maybe than other years. So at that point, I'm done. I will turn it back to and Superintendent Kamick. Would you like to jump in?
I just wanted to make a comment. And I think for our board, they understand this, but as you said, Mr. Hillman, there's a lot of people who tune into budget conversations at different points in time. School finance, in my opinion, is inherently backwards in many of the things that are outlined in the education code. For example, we are producing our budget June 10th for the community and the board's first review, and we don't even know the state budget. Oftentimes we don't know the full outcome of the state budget until after June when we get all the trailer bill language. One of the things that I'm asked most often when I'm out talking with groups in our community about our fiscal challenges is around our reserves. And Mr. Hillman had a slide that talked about our reserves. And one of the most common questions I get is, you have a reserve, why aren't you spending it to address the problems that you're facing? And I think it's important to clarify those reserves because they don't operate in the same way that most people would think about reserves in a budget. It's not the same as a savings account that you might use for emergencies in a personal circumstance. The education code is very clear about what happens to your reserve account. If you use your reserves for anything, you have to repay those reserves by the next regular budget report. So as an example, if we made our first interim budget report to the board, happens usually in November. If we dipped into those reserves, we have to repay that amount by the second interim budget report. And in terms of
because they're earmarked reserves.
because they're earmarked reserves and we have to stay at that margin. And so the ability for school districts to repay those is virtually impossible. And that's where school districts have to go out and seek a loan in order to do that. The other component that I wanted to share in terms of reserves that was asked a lot of me as I was out talking with different parts of our community over the year is how much does that reserve cover? And so the 3% reserve might sound like a number that should cushion us. That number I don't think covers a full payroll run, maybe 5 weeks of payroll in total at most, or not even one full month of payroll. So when we talk about the reserves, we have to understand that they're there as a state requirement, but they're really not operational for us. They're not a fund that we can use to float through a difficult budget circumstance.
Okay, do you want to have questions? Do we have any public comment?
No.
Okay, so then I'll turn it over to you.
I have a question, although I think you may have answered it, but maybe this is just kind of dotting the I on it. So the question that I had was around the projected multi-year projected ADA percentage, and the fact that we've seen a shift. While it's little, it still is money, right? When we need every penny. So that ADA now at the third interim is 95.88. And then we still keep the projected 95.5 for the 2 outgoing years. I assume based on what you said that that's because we have such a low reserve that we can't over predict. But I just wanted to ask that question to see if you could help clarify it a little bit more.
It is that the reserve is low enough. We don't want to over, what does the Fed used to say? It was an irrational exuberance around certain things. We don't want to get too happy about a particular number. It came in once. So if you give me the choice, I would like to see that number be confirmed. And do we see 95.88% ADA at P1, which is the first part of next school year? If we see that come in, okay, maybe ADA is increasing, maybe it's stabilizing, maybe we're on a trajectory to get back to our historical ADA percentage, which was 97% before COVID. I think then I would feel a lot more comfortable, and I think Evan would feel a lot more comfortable about making that change, because we see a couple of data points that come in, it's trending that direction. But for right now, this is the first increase over 95.5 that we've seen. And the 95.5 number came from the last several years of P1 and P2. And for everyone watching at home, P1 is the first part of the school year, P2 is towards the second half of the school year. That's the state terminology for it. And we see that those variables come in, and it's trending better. It's better than it was coming out of COVID, but we're still not back to where we were. So we wouldn't want to make an assumption and say, well, we used to be at 97%, let's put it back there. Until we see that data point come in, wherever it comes in, 96, 95.8, whatever, we need to see it happen a couple of times to say, all right, now we feel comfortable using that number as an assumption going forward.
Thank you.
And I think something that even underscores that more is if you look at the small changes that you discussed between second interim and third interim, the expenditures are bigger than the revenue there by almost 4 million, which in the old days, 4 million is easily absorbed in our reserve. But these are razor thin reserves. I mean, even the health and welfare increase that was almost 1 million. And, you talk about those little adjustments as that's kind of budget dust, but our reserves are like less than budget dust right now. And we just can't afford to be in, I mean, there's no cushion.
Okay, any other questions, comments? So can I get a motion to?
The public comment has to be related to the agenda item, which is on the third interim.
It would have to be about the third interim report, not about budget cuts. That's a separate item. And we're not addressing that tonight.
I guess one question for clarification, your recommendation on the page leading up to all this was for approval. Is this for approval for positive or qualified certification, or is that different for the second interim report?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the task that the board normally takes at first interim and second interim is to self-certify are we positive, qualified, or negative? And to run through that quickly, positive means we can meet our financial obligations over the three-year reporting period. Qualified means we may or may not be able to, which is where we're sitting right now. And negative means you won't be able to do it, and you might even not be able to do it for a year. So qualified sounds like a good thing, but it's actually like middle of the road. It's the middle rating. You don't want that. You want the positive rating. You don't do that at third interim.
At third, okay.
Right. So we don't have to ask for, we're not making a recommendation around that. The county has already assessed our situation and believes that we are at qualified. They want this extra reporting period to double check what they think. And I think what we've been able to show is that what we said was going to happen at second interim, we reported it in March, but it's data through January. Now we're reporting data through April and showing this is where things are trending. They're trending very close to what we said was going to happen when we talked about it in March. So January is like the middle of the year. This report is data through April. So you're very much near the end. You only have a couple more months before we get to June 30th. So it's a little bit safer. Your actual numbers are being reported here. Expenditures and revenues are trending the way we thought they would trend. So there's less risk at this moment in time in showing what the end of the year is going to look like than it would have said by looking halfway through the year. Each month that we progress through with our expenditures out to employees and salaries and other expenditures proves that the actuals are turning true, for lack of a better term. So in this case, they're not asking for a self-certification. You're really just approving the third interim report. And then Evan and his team will do the back end work to send this to the county for their review.
So the action that we're being asked for is to accept it.
accept it,
So
yeah.
I'll move that we accept the third interim.
I'll second.
Motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote, Student Board Member Hodges.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, so we're on to informational items. 8.1, first reading of new board policy and administrative regulation policy 5131.8, mobile communication devices. And we have Executive Director John Campopiano and Director of Technology Kelly Hill.
There we go. Good evening, President Shelley Clark and the members of our board, Superintendent CJ Kamick, and the members of our cabinet. Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Kelly Hilton. I'm the Director of Technology, and I'm joined by John Campopiano, Executive Director of Secondary Education. We're here to present the proposed student use of mobile communication device policy, which is really aimed at fostering a focused learning environment. So we were here in this boardroom back in October, and we talked about this ask. And so we're going to start by just reviewing what is the task. According to AB 3216, also known as the Phone Free Schools Act, a California state law designed by Governor Newsom, all schools are mandated to create develop a policy limiting cell phone use by students during the school day. And so we have been working on this policy because we are looking for significant input from the community on this, and that's what we want to share with you tonight. So why are we having this legislation? Really, the legislation is to be aware of how to support our students to reduce our distractions with phones, to improve mental health, to have digital safety, and to increase student engagement because they're very distracting. So with that, there's some requirements with the law, and the requirements ask us to adopt the policies by July of 2026. And at this point tonight, we're going to bring a recommendation of what we think so far. But with that, we needed to have significant input from students, teachers, classified staff, parents, and administrators. So we wanted to share with you how we've been doing that this year to try to really reflect the community needs. And then with this policy, once it's in effect, then we will be looking at it every 5 years to really reevaluate if it's working within our system. There are some exceptions to this policy. And so as we're talking about it, if there is an emergency, students would be, or response to threat, they would have access to phones. When a teacher or administrator grants rights to use the phone, if a licensed physician is allowing or recommending that a student use the phone, and when it is a part of an individualized education program. So since we've met last October, the committee that we've been working with, John and myself, and lots of contributions from Deb Hedis, Katie Witt, and Christine Guajardo, we've been working towards really getting that significant input across the organization and the community. So in December, we launched a Hanover survey that went community-wide, and that went to 6th through 12th grade students, all staff, and to families, and we'll share the results of that tonight. Also in December, we visited steering committees, equity, deep learning, and social emotional learning, and then went back in April. So we launched the conversation with those steering committees and then went back with the input after the survey. We visited PTA Council, had community cell phone forums that were online for people to come in and have small group discussions. We broke those groups into elementary, middle, and high school discussions as we gathered input from the community in those forums. We also visited the Student Senate group in March. We had a student cell phone forum where students came online and shared with us in the same way that the adults did. And then we had principal meetings where we shared some feedback and ideas at that time and asked them to go back to staff and get feedback. So they worked with their staff in May with feedback on this. And then we've shared with our union partners and ed services. The survey itself, we had 6,108 respondents, and the key findings were that there was a lot of people who prefer restrictive cell phone usage over a lenient one. But really the discussion is how restrictive is that? And that's something that we'll definitely want to discuss tonight. But another thing that we noticed is that those who prefer a restrictive cell phone policy cite their most common reason as reducing distractions, 89%, fostering in-person social interactions at 66%, and reducing dependency on technology at 54%. And then we also had respondents who prefer that the policy is most concerned with they're most concerned about emergency preparedness and access. So that came up for families at 65 and 63% as well, or for those who took the survey. The survey also had open-ended responses that highlighted the need really for a balanced approach to this. So there's a couple quotes here that highlight that balanced approach. The first one, please ensure that it's practical to enforce equally and doesn't endanger safety by blocking access in an emergency. And the second one, the policy should be as restrictive as possible for elementary and middle schools because in general, cell phones don't provide any benefits at this age, but will be a huge distraction. In high school, the policy might slightly be less restrictive so that students may communicate with their friends outside of school. However, cell phones should still be prohibited during any learning class time, whether it is a teacher guided or time of independent self-study. So what we're going to start going through first is the Hanover survey data with you. And this chart here shows the feedback from elementary schools. The Hanover survey had these questions that asked preferences on prohibiting and restricting cell phones. And so prohibiting was, we combined the responses from those two questions, prohibiting being no cell phones and restricting meaning limiting the cell phone use. So we combined those percentages on this chart. And as you can see, students in elementary school did not provide feedback in the survey, but when John goes through the middle school and high school charts, you'll be able to see the student voice on that feedback survey as well. So looking at elementary schools, across the board, staff, parents, and caregivers were pretty closely aligned in their feedback responses. And now we'll take a look at middle school.
Thank you. Good to see all of you. Middle school, we have 590 middle school students take it, and I'm very proud. If you look at this data here, students, 93% of them favored restrictions or prohibiting cell phones in classes. And then you see our staff and our parent caregivers. So they're very aligned there. The line below it is also very important time during instructional time when students ask to use the restroom or go to the office. Very high numbers that it should be restricted, prohibited. And that's something that we can talk more about in our questions if there's discussions on that. There is quite a bit of difference with our students wanting to use their phone at middle school at lunch. And you can see the adult responses are more restrictive. And in 2014, the year before I took over at Stone Valley Middle School, Ms. Finko and Ms. Daly, who are back there, were part of a staff that when I started the day one, they had set up a cell phone policy where they wanted kids not to use them. And it was pretty amazing to walk into it because kids were learning how to discuss and do that at the middle school level. I don't think that's a big surprise at middle school. I think our staff, our parents, our students want to have a cell phone free, even if they tell us something differently during instructional time. We have a K through 8 weight mindset, and we'll get into that in a few minutes so that you can see some of the different ideas in our policies, recommendations. All right, high school. This is pretty interesting, as you can imagine. Let's start with the instructional class time. Again, very impressed with our high school students. 85% think that it should be restricted and prohibited in classes. That's wonderful. And then you can see the staff, 99%, parent caregiver during class time. Same thing with the ones on the right during the hallways, common areas during instructional time. So we'll talk about instructional time, but so you can see the difference there where you're in class and you ask to go to the restroom, students feel they should be allowed to take their cell phone at a much, they believe that they should have that process. And that's something that you can see. And then you look at the lunch data. If you look at lunchtime, 4% of students think it should be prohibited, staff at 33%, parent caregivers at 36%. So you can see those numbers go down in terms of restrictions as we age in the schools. So we look forward to discussing that as well. Some of the key themes that came up in our really deep dive into getting information from our community, and our team did a wonderful job gathering that. Smartwatches are a concern in K-8. And it was brought up over and over again that they should be included, smartwatches, in anything. And you'll see in the policy we propose other wearable devices as well, glasses, et cetera, because we can't keep up with technology, right? So we don't want to limit ourselves in a policy. Parents, caregivers want access, as Ms. Hilton spoke about earlier, during emergencies and for routine check-ins. That can drive our staff nuts sometimes. Probably they're in the middle of teaching and they get a text, one of their students gets a text about after school. That's not what we want to have in class. Thus, the data is pretty high. And one of the things that has come up in discussions at other school districts that have done it is students are figuring out ways to circumvent restrictive rules. And our students admitted that they would do anyway, or they've already found workarounds. So we always are trying to keep up. And we have Dr. Ahern here, principal of Monte Vista High School, who can also share any responses as well as he works through that. So I'm going to turn it back to Ms. Hilton, because we looked at a lot of different school districts to get a sense, those close to us and further south, and just wanted to share what they're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, as part of us doing our due diligence, we reached out to colleagues in other school districts to ask them how they were approaching this task. And we were looking at other California school district policies across the state. And when we did that, we found just a handful of school districts that are close in location to us and some farther south who had very similar policies to the ones that we are going to be discussing tonight as a recommendation. And they're listed here. Another thing that we did is as we wrote the policy, the process alone allowed us to have some really rich discussion about defining this. And John started to speak to that when he said the technology keeps enhancing. So how can we write a policy that is promoting that digital health and wellness and education piece as well? So it's less about the tool and more about the use of these tools and what's appropriate and what time. So we've defined these three parts of the policy, and I'll just go through each of them because we'll be using this language as we talk about the policy proposal. The first one is instead of just cell phones, you'll see the term mobile communication device, meaning anything but not limited to smartphones, smartwatches, and wearable communication devices or MCDs. Also in the policy, when we're discussing the school day, it's defined as the period from the time a student arrives on campus until the time of their dismissal, including class time, passing periods, breaks, and lunch periods, as well as during school-sponsored activities. And when we use the term school day in the policy, that's what that means. Instructional time means the time specifically designated for the classroom instruction and academic activities as determined by the school rules or policies. So those three definitions became quite clear when we were talking about the use of technology. And you'll see when we share some of the ideas around that, just coming on campus and leaving campus and all the parameters around managing this, that's really the nuance of this policy and the discussion that we had in a lot of our forums and within the survey as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk us through some of the key items in the proposed policy. So we're going to start with preschool through 8th grade. So we really want to wait as long as possible, wait till 8. So this applies to everyone from preschool to 8th grade. During the school day, students shall not use or have their MCDs visible. Devices must be turned off or silenced and stored in backpacks or other designated storage during the entire school day, including class time, passing periods, breaks, recess, and lunch. They can be used after school dismissal occurs. And board policy, as we spoke about earlier, they are exceptions for emergencies, health-related needs, IEPs as part of IEP. So that's K through 8. Now I want to jump to 6th grade through 8th grade. And one of the proposals was that we would allow, we have teachers that know how to use the phones or the devices or the Chromebooks or what have they in class. They've been doing that as part of their lesson plan. So we know that 6th through 8th grade, we want to be able to give that opportunity if a teacher feels that it will help increase instructional learning, et cetera, and work with the site admin principal to determine it. So 6 through 8 during the school day, students may use their MCDs as specifically directed by a teacher for instructional purposes. Anyone that's been in a classroom knows the difference between a kid pulling out, trying to play a game versus a teacher using a lesson plan, maybe an elective class that has some cameras and wants to do photography across campus with cell phones. So that'd be something that would be in conversation with our site in that collaboration. So that's 6 through 8. So I wanted to make sure you saw K5, nothing at all. 6 through 8, they're out. They're only out if the teacher directs it for an instructional reason. Okay, let's jump to high school. This is the part about instructional time we really wanted to highlight there. During instructional time, devices shall be turned off and stored out of sight, backpacks, designated storage, unless the teacher explicitly grants permission for instructional use. This includes while students are in the classroom, even if they've finished their work and during restroom breaks. You're thinking back to the data, right? And we know our staff really likes that. We know our students that, but we really believe in that recommendation that instructional time should be instructional time. If you need to leave, you get back quickly. And our teachers are amazing at having policies to get students out of class. But if you can imagine a large high school, if one student left per class, that's a lot of people in the hallways during that time. And so we really want that to be efficient. MCDs may be used before school, during lunch, passing time breaks, and or after school. And if you go back to the slide of the neighboring districts, Akalani's district, that is exactly what those districts are doing, Dublin, et cetera. Instructional time, the focus is on that, having policies and procedures for students that they must follow, that staff is communicated, administration enforces, and our community is aware of it. So that's the high school aspect. Again, they can be used at the direction of the teacher for specific learning activities. And again, the health, the emergency, or required as part of an IEP. Okay, so we threw a lot out there, and I know there'll be some questions or maybe comments or go there. One of the ideas that came up in many of our discussions, and students were amazing. If you have a teenager in your house or you want to have a fun conversation, bring up cell phones. We almost ruined Mother's Day with my mom and my wife and my 16-year-old going through this. It's a fun way to have that discussion, and we learned so much from our students. And many students said, I need, after this many hours in class, to go and just listen to a song. Other students say, I want to go to a place where there's no phones at all. So this idea came out of our student, staff, and parents to have a no phone zone where, for example, Dr. Ahern is here, where he would work with his site leaders and students to figure out a place on campus that could be free of phones. And I'm not saying this would be it, Dr. Ahern, but the library at lunch, there's no phones. It's a zone where you go because you got to get away from it in different locations. Because in high school, remember K-8, they don't use their phone at all during lunch. But in high school, they can as part of the recommendation. So we wanted to create this idea. So that's something that came up through all of our input as an idea. And finally, our last slide, our next steps. Once the policy is finalized, we plan to implement next year and communicate so that everyone is on the same page. And as they start the school year, it's very clear what the expectations and standards are. So thank you. And we are open for any questions.
Okay, we have one comment card, so we'll take Melinda Daly.
Hi, I'm Melinda Daly. I'm a teacher and a union leader, but tonight I'm talking to you as a parent of a freshman, mostly my freshman. I don't want to talk about my third grader having a cell phone yet. I just feel, and I support the presentation. I understand it. And I was, as Mr. Campopiano said, a teacher who helped implement it, and it does work. I just feel like it needs to be said out loud. A reason that a lot of people want students to have access to their cell phones is because of safety and fear. And that when we live in a country that would rather ban cell phones before banning assault weapons, that we need to have some way that children can tell their parents, I am okay, I am safe. I have gotten those texts. They are the worst, but they are also helpful to my kids, to a generation that has been raised on lockdown drills and dealing with things that we never had to deal with as kids. I am just asking that when you are looking at the policy to remember that that is a big piece of this puzzle, and to make sure that they can have access to these in case of emergency. Thank you.
Okay. Questions?
Comments too?
Yeah.
So in the one area where we talked about exceptions, health reasons, IEPs, I feel like we left one group of students out, and that's students with 504 plans. Because there may be kids that are relying on that phone to take a picture of it and read it to them, or to somehow manage a health issue, that would fall under health issues. But I just think kids who have 504 plans are constantly having to remind people of what is in their plan and what they're entitled to. And I just wouldn't want this to be one more thing that they have to explain that it should be equivalent to the IEP.
And I think that's an interesting piece because I'm looking through the policy. We don't state 504. We talk about health needs, and it might add that clarification for our community, our parents, our student staff. It's a really good catch.
And I had one more other,
Go
if I
ahead.
can just go right ahead. I know the requirement is that we revisit it in 5 years. I would like to request that we revisit it in, maybe 1 is too fast, but I think 2. I heard from several elementary families who are absolutely in favor of this and in favor of the phrase you used, John, about K-8 wait. And so I kind of wonder if there might be a desire to go further with high school once we get over the shock of it. And so I think an earlier than 5 years out of how is this going, because if people really are waiting till 8, there might be a whole lot more kids who don't even own a phone in middle school. And then even the idea of using it as part of a lesson might become an equity thing. So I'm just saying, I think 5 years is too long to revisit it just to check in. How's it going?
And I think we all agree. And one of the things we expect at all levels, but particularly at the high school level, because our sites need to collaborate with staff, certificated and classified, how it's working. So my expectation is our secondary principals are meeting with their teams, because if there's a breakdown in it, let's say that a teacher feels that we're not taking the phone or communicating with parent or vice versa, it's coming. Students are very smart, right? And they will figure things out. So we expect, as part of our quarterly kind of check-ins with SRVUSD site leaders and other teacher leaders on the high schools, what's working, what's not, what do we need to change? And they're already actively doing that without this formal policy whenever it's finalized, but we expect that. So we'll have information if you want it even before that time.
But I think it would also be reassuring to our community that they would have an opportunity to be weighing in as part of how's it going as well.
I think tangential to that too, and it's not a part of this policy, but monitoring our Chromebook website access, because kids find a way. It's like the Jurassic Park line, nature will find a way. And it's like they're gonna find a way. And what I don't want to see is a shift. And I think it's less likely because of just it's cumbersome to hold a Chromebook. But you don't want to see a bunch of kids out with like Chromebooks being like, oh, I'm doing the things I would do on my phone. So I think just from a technology perspective is kind of seeing what that looks like. Yeah.
Well, I just have more of a comment for both of you and everyone who's been a part of this policy. I'd like to thank everyone involved for creating such a transparent process. I feel like you've really touched every single aspect and sub community of SRVUSD, especially on the student engagement front. Really making sure that middle schoolers are surveyed. A lot of the time they don't, get to engage as much, and so I've seen that in the student senate. They're very appreciative of a lot of these efforts that have been done. And I also feel like this policy is very balanced, especially for high school, middle school students. I agree with the wait till 8, I believe it was. I was a wait till 8 kid, and it was amazing. It was one of the best decisions I think my parents ever made. And I think in the middle school level, there absolutely is an equity disparity. Like, a lot of students will have cell phones and others won't. And so it's a bit of an advantage for those who do, and it can make people who don't have one feel left out. And of course, not having one during the school day, especially during lunch and passing periods in middle school, is a great incentive for students to focus on in-person interaction, which is what people should be doing in school, and building social skills. But once we get into that high school level, I agree that these MCDs as defined are pretty much owned by every single student I've ever met and talked to. And so I believe that we run into an enforcement issue if we say, well, you can't have them throughout the whole school day. And they can be used for a lot of positive things. And so I think you've done a great job of coming up with a policy that is both nuanced, but also understanding of the needs of each student at different grade levels. And so I'd like to thank both of you and the teams you've worked with for that.
I guess I have a question for you, Travis. Does this policy seem to reflect what you're hearing from Student Senate and from everybody else that you're in contact with?
Absolutely. I think that this policy is very balanced and fair. And it definitely, like, for me as a student and from what I've heard from other people, it seems to be what they're looking for, especially when it comes to when we are restricting phone use and saying it can't be used, having it on you in your backpack. I think that's very reasonable. It also ties into some of the safety things we've heard from our community as well. That feels to be very balanced and fair rather than locking them up in pouches or keeping them down in the office. Also, from an enforceability perspective, that's going to be a lot easier for administrators to keep track of rather than doing check-ins and, checking names off a list, who has one in, who doesn't. So I think it was done quite fairly.
Great.
Can I ask a question? So in the AR, under health needs, or I'm sorry, under emergency situations, it says in the case of an emergency or in response to a perceived threat to safety as determined by the student or school staff. So that allows for, so I can envision a situation where a student may feel unsafe, but that's not necessarily a community safety issue that might allow a teacher to say, okay, everyone can have their phones and use them to contact their parents. So if a single student in a situation with themselves or with someone around them that's not, community wide, if they choose to use their phone to contact their parent because of some kind of safety issue for them, do they then, a teacher or staff member says you can't have your phone out, they still have the right to say, no, I need to have my phone, I need to be able to contact my parent? Is that correct? So they wouldn't, if there's a disciplinary situation that's set up for that, they still have the ability to say, no, for me, I feel like I'm just kind of thinking about how situations could unfold in terms of, because one kid's experience, they may feel unsafe in a situation where the staff member that's, may not understand that, but if it says in the AR that as determined by the student, that's determined by the student, right? So how does that?
I mean, I'm hoping that that would fall under those other parameters as well, as far as health related issues or IEPs, or we should definitely add 504s as a specific as well. And if there is an emergency under that they feel that they need it, that could be stated in that what realm, because not every staff member is going to know every student's situation.
Right.
And then kind of discuss through that.
Right.
And to that, thank you. I feel very confident that we'll be able to identify through student administration communication, because I agree, you're right. What if the door slams, that may impact you differently than it would me or vice, right?
Right.
And so I understand that. So there will have to be that education piece, which is a part that we didn't spend a lot of time on here, but when we restrict, we want to be able to replace with some learning, some of that. So I imagine there's going to be that conversation, teacher student. I do not want to have an argument start in the middle of class.
Right.
And so I have confidence in our staff and having that in our administrators. But that is interesting. I circled that because there's not much detail there.
Or maybe it would be more helpful to avoid that potential conflict, which then has to get resolved, to be that students may ask to have it for it, because I think it's be a lot more reasonable if they were to ask their teacher, I'm feeling whatever, may I have my phone? And the teacher can say yes, as opposed to just going and getting it and then causing a problem.
Yes, thank you for that input. Definitely, we can take note on that and add that for some revisions.
Yeah, and then how is it going to be school site driven in terms of how each school site handles the discipline around cell phone use?
Well, I'm going to let John speak to this more, but I will say I was really proud to talk to a lot of our administrators and staff members and students through this process. Part of this process was a great way to get to know what's happening really in our schools. And I will say that a lot of our schools are doing really close to this policy already, and hearing directly from middle school students who appreciated it, similarly to what Travis just shared, who understood it. They didn't love it, not all of them, but a lot of this is in place, and I'll let you speak to that a little bit more.
Yes, and Dr. Ahern's here, and I work closely with Dr. Ahern and Mr. Litton because I directly supervise those sites, and both of them have described what they're currently doing, how they're going to get more input from staff, all staff, and then how to communicate it effectively, right, with new teachers or different staff. Mr. Allen, who's at California High School, you know, every teacher has a different idea. A lot of our teachers just say, Ms. Pratt, please put it away right now, and it's over, right? Others need to have that. So we expect that they're going to be very similar. Our high school principals meet monthly just in a PLC to discuss best practices. So we think it'll evolve into something, but we want to give site input so that it's not us dictating it and letting the staff, the certificated staff, the leaders classified work with the administration.
I have a question. Did you, in the school districts that you talked to about this issue, that they've put in place something similar? All of them were similar to what you're proposing tonight? Did you talk to any districts that had a straight up ban for all grades?
Well, yes, this is, my son, goes to a school district that two of the high schools had a full ban last year or this current year. And, the school board in that district last Wednesday, agreed at some point, and I don't know how it's gonna be because there's been a lot of parent input, to have yonder pouches at all the high schools. And the positive input we received from administration and Superintendent Kamick, I know, has spoken to that superintendent district. There was a lot of really positive initial at the high school level. But one of the things that's happening now, and it's a very common thing, is the kids are getting their own magnets, their own ability to remove, or they lose the pouch and it becomes cost prohibitive. So there's been those challenges when I'm speaking to the site administrators as we get into this time of the year. So I don't know what that district will do. The other district that I worked with and spoke with was in Clovis, where they had some really strict policies that probably were hard to enforce as they went along. They were outside school punishments for using the phone. And Ed Code's pretty clear about what would be a suspension and what wouldn't. So they're evolving theirs similarly to ours. What they're trying to do is just prohibit lunch, but some of those schools like Doherty Valley are huge. So it's hard for us to be able to monitor that. So that's the limited information I have. I've been following that district where my son goes very closely. And it's amazing how the parents have come out when they saw the dollar amount that was mentioned by the school board in terms of passing that project.
So this is a very balanced, I will say that. My concern is in high school, there are so many issues with mental health and the contribution that social media and the like, cyberbullying, all of that is associated with cell phone use. And so while definitely our elementary and middle schools, our younger kids, we definitely want them, I think it's great, your slogan, wait till 8. But for high school, in some ways, for me, and I understand the fact that parents want to be able to know that their kids are safe and be able to communicate with them. But my concern is that there are students at the high school level that are being damaged by the way that cell phones are being used during school time. And even if we only have them not be able to use them during instructional time, all of those other issues of mental health and cyberbullying and all the things that go on during the day are still a big distraction. And it's hard for me to hear that and to see that and not do something about it, because there are a number of students in our district and all over that are addicted to these phones and the things that go on and back and forth between students. And no matter how much you educate and you let them know about how to use them responsibly, it's very difficult when somebody has that kind of attachment to a phone or any other thing outside of themselves to be able to reason with that. So that's, in some ways for me, high school probably needs more of the total ban than the younger kids, because a lot of them don't have phones. And I'm totally for having that for the elementary and middle schools. But that's where I get caught on this, because I just see the damage being done. And as a board member, as a mom, as a parent, it's hard for me to sit and watch that and then say, oh, well, it feels like a half measure. And I know that a lot of people, that's not a popular view, and a lot of people don't agree with it, but that's my perspective on it. So, I mean, I wouldn't vote against this, but I don't think it goes far enough.
Yeah, you want to go first? I have some thoughts.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I totally get where you're coming from, and that's where it feels like, and I see kind of, you know, both sides to it. I wouldn't, if that's what they presented, I wouldn't be 100% against it, but I would be thinking of, well, I think it's going to be too draconian, and people are going to find a way. It's just pretty easy to grab a burner phone from your parents' house because everybody's got 10 iPhones laying around and throw it in. And there's just so many, like, kids will find a ways. The other thing I would say too, on the flip side of that too, is encouraging parents, especially if their kids are experiencing cyberbullying, by having access during lunchtime to their phones, is there's a lot of settings you can add on an iPhone with screen time of limited apps and what that they can actually see during certain times of the day too. So that partnership with parents of going, hey, let us help you understand the technology that your kids have as well too. It's unfortunate because there's like no perfect
No, there is.
policy,
Yeah,
but
I
I do.
agree.
It's like I do kind of lean a little bit more towards the. I don't think you're wrong. I think you're actually right, but it's sometimes it's not enough to be right. But you got to be effective at the implementation of it too, and that's where I think this one does a good balance, like Travis was saying.
Yeah, and I think to that point, you know, having a balance, because I think I agree with Shelley in terms of has been a negative impact on a whole generation, several generations now at this point, right? I also know that digital devices are tools, just like AI is a tool, just like, you know, and so how do we ensure, and kids today that, you know, are growing up always having had cell phones in the world, that's like, you know, not even our laptops, our TRS-80s, my TRS-80 way back in the 1900s, right? Like, you know, this is what they use. So how do we provide guardrails, help them to understand, and then also how do we, oh, there's a hand raised in the back. I don't know if
you heard.
but then let me just finish my thought and then and how do we ensure that they know how, give them the opportunity to use it and to learn how to use it. So, you know, so in taking this opportunity of this policy and also providing ways to teach media literacy, to teach how do we manage the use of our time. Cell phones exist. They're used in the workforce. They're used, you know, what's age appropriate in terms of how it's used as a tool. And then how do we ensure that they know how to use it properly and that they support their mental health in the process, and that and their parents help with that as well. So
I completely agree with you, because we have students who are consumers of technology, not users of technology. And so it's extremely important to address appropriate use. And when Shelley was speaking about this concerns, I think about how like walking through today at lunchtime, students some are using devices, some are throwing around a football, some are just sitting in the grass. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on that does involve technology. But I think about those instances where students are, we have to discipline students for harassing, you know, cyberbullying, whatnot. How do we use the policy to lean into that more? Perhaps we simply say, oh, and by the way, in addition to your X amount of days of suspension, we have to check your phone in every day for the rest of the semester. Those are ways of addressing it specifically. So as a result, you have an additional deterrent to ensure students aren't abusing it, because all students aren't doing this. But if students have a deterrent in regards to, I'm doing this and I'm just going to get a 5-day suspension, no, I'm going to get more than that. I'm going to have additional consequences. For example, we have students who, if they drive inappropriately in the parking lot, they lose their privilege to park on our campus. Similar approach if a student is using technology inappropriately. Just my take.
Yeah, and I think that, like even with the ethnic studies curriculum, there was a little bit of that media literacy, and how do we kind of, now that we're talking at a policy level around management of cell phones, control of cell phones, right? That provides an opportunity to teach around how me as an individual, myself, or if I was 16, but as an individual person, how am I going to manage myself in this cell phone? Right? I've been given the structure that's going to help me to break that seal, right? That addiction, right? But then now how do I control it and manage it? So
So one of the things that like really woke me up was some of the statistics from some of the, across the country, from some of the school districts who have done bans. Bentonville School District, teachers' perceptions of student engagement increased 85% with a ban. Drug-related offenses down 51%. Verbal or physical aggression offenses decreased 57%. Indian River County School District in Florida, fights and violent altercations decreased 14%. Disciplinary issues in middle school down 9%. Cell phone infractions down 31%. And North Adams Public Schools in Massachusetts, disciplinary referrals down 75%. Ridley School District in Pennsylvania, disciplinary referrals in high school down 35%, and suspensions in high school down 30%. Now, I don't know if all of that had to do with cell phone bans, but these are places that did that, and these are their statistics. So that really showed me, I was very surprised to see that dramatic of an increase or decrease in some of these things. So that's why I think, this is a good place to start, but I think we should be open to seeing how it goes. And I like Dr. Ahern's idea about having other deterrents maybe in place to try to combat some of these other things that are going on with the phones.
And Shelley, part of why I brought up the 2-year look at it is maybe as we see the benefit, it will be even easier to go that direction. But I just think going cold turkey would be really hard on today's students who are using their phones appropriately. And I just worry too fast could actually hurt things.
I understand. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that, yeah, if we do it like 2 years, right, instead of 5 years. Some of the, ways that, I don't know, issues or something like that, that we may not even foresee right now, right? And we can kind of adjust, right, if we need to, the policy and stuff. I think, yeah, it's a very balanced. Thank you very much. To everyone who've given the feedback, right, and worked on this policy. And I also like that, yeah. So I think that many of our kids, most of our kids, that the issue, right, when they're not using their devices appropriately is like they don't know how. It's either right, nothing, or like too much. And I think that I believe it's great that, start with nothing at K through 6, and then 6th to 8th grade, kind of help them a little bit. And then if they have lessons, right, to say, hey, exactly, the media literacy and also digital literacy, and say, hey, this is how you, and then kind of get them started. And then hopefully by high school, right, they will be using it totally appropriately, still within like no distraction during the instructional time.
So we have one comment card, Karen Cleary.
I'm a teacher and also a parent, and
Oh, there we go.
as a parent, I really appreciate this. I have a 14-year-old and 16-year-old, and I think it is really needed within the schools. As a teacher, I look at it and look at the logistics of it. Cell phones have been around for a while. Smartwatches, everyone has them. I teach kindergarten, so luckily my kids don't have them yet. But someone I was sitting next to teaches second grade, and many of her kids have smartwatches. So my question to you is the management piece of it. Today we found out as a school that we will no longer have our assistant principal. We are a school that is 690 students. Saying that, how are we going to manage this with our lack of counselors now and no assistant principal? I think teachers feel like we have to be all the things all the time. And now we need to police, police cell phones, smartwatches. Again, I think it's a great idea. But we look at the logistics of this is one more thing that we have to do. And now we have less people on the field to enforce this, which is going to take a lot in the beginning of it because so many kids have these items. So I think that would be my question to you in the midst of lack of admin and the amount of students, how that is going to settle for teachers, or what will that look like?
I appreciate the comments and certainly the concern, in particular around any reduction in assistant principals is always concerning for any school site. And we recognize that we wish we were in a position to be adding more assistant principals. I think what Mr. Campopiano shared earlier is the faith that we have in our principals and our school staffs to solve those problems. And if we overprescribe the solution across 22 elementary schools, or our comprehensive high schools, or our middle schools, or alternative schools, we're selling short that opportunity for local control over some of those decisions, because it's not going to look the same at every single school site. And we do have the lack of counseling coming. We do have changes in assistant principal positions. And I think we have to go back and look at what do we do in the times, or did we do in the times when we didn't have those people? So for example, at Twin Creeks, they currently have a part-time assistant principal. So what are we doing on the days that that person's not there to address the issues and concerns? For our elementary counselors, some schools may have a little bit more supplemented through local funds, but our elementary counselors are part-time. So what do we do in those circumstances? And that's a big question that's coming up across all of our sites through the whole district, because we're all being asked to do more with less next year. And when we look at that, and I've been to each school site and talked to students and talked to staff, that's been one of the biggest questions. And I certainly agree with that feeling. I think we as an industry of education have gotten too good for too long at doing more with less. And I think that's why individuals in Sacramento feel quite comfortable with some of their decision making. So I think we have to lean into what Mr. Campopiano described is, let's get together and talk about that at the school site level, and let's allow our school site leaders to collaborate with their colleagues, because we know that all schools in one area are compared to how they're handling a problem. And so when we talk about that PLC model for our high school principals, I know our middle school principals are doing the same thing. I know our elementary principal team is a really tight group of leaders that collaborate around those same problems. So I think we need to lean into that model to start to solve some of those problems.
Can I also ask that we maybe, and this is maybe at the district level, but that we also help to lean into communicating the shifts to our parent community, and maybe asking our PTAs or to provide some parent education around how this policy is shifting the expectations of our students in our classrooms, so that as a parent, and especially, the younger students, if the parents really understand, and they know that my kid has to have their smartwatch turned off or whatever the solution is, that then they can help to police that too. And I know there will be a percentage that, that may not have the bandwidth to pay attention to this kind of thing, but at least if there's a community effort to help support this policy, And that, I think that's something that we can do from a communication standpoint and a parent ed standpoint.
Yes, we certainly can. And I think it brings up kind of the fundamental approach behind this is I believe that it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And the policy is one tool. The other is continuing to educate children and adults on responsible use. And I'm speaking as a parent of an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And in their school, their phones were not put in yonder pouches, but they were not allowed to be out all day long. And I've talked to my kids regularly about what's their experience like with that. And they did share that there's a little more social interaction, a little more eye to eye contact, which I think is something we all want for everybody in the world. But I also had my own observations of my two children. And admittingly, for who they are as individuals, they utilize social media differently. My son's social media feed, I'm fairly certain, is full of the things that he likes, and he looks at it for views of things that he enjoys, whether it's trucks, off-roading, fishing, like his hobbies. I know that my 14-year-old daughter uses it as a social tool, and it is a massive communication piece for her. And what I observed in their behavior is school's over, and for my daughter in particular, it was almost like, okay, I haven't had it for 7.5 hours. Now it's time for mass consumption. And so we had to go through a lot of discussions about responsible use, because not having it during the day and then mass consuming it when you get it back speaks to, I think, what President Clark was talking about is how healthy is the relationship with the tool? And as Dr. Ahern said, are they technology users or consumers? And so I think the parent ed piece is going to be a really important part of what we do moving forward, in addition to the policy. And I think we have some great groups with PTA, ed funds, local agencies where we can continue to partner on parent education for that.
I had one more question that relates to kind of the detail in the policy. You guys did a really clear job explaining those definitions, and in school day, you included school-sponsored events. So I'm assuming that would be athletic events, concerts, dances, things like that. The high school, I'm assuming from what I'm reading that because those aren't during the instructional times and are allowed during lunch and passing periods, they would be allowed at those events. Is that correct? Then at middle school, would they be precluded from having phones at the dances? I'm just trying to make sure that we're all understanding what we wrote before we bring it forward to pass it. Like, did we mean what we, like how you brought up the exception of the student?
Those are great. A couple of things is I think instructional time I'm thinking about visiting a Holocaust museum as a class. That's instructional time. I don't want phones out unless it's being used. Like, again, we'll figure that out. That has to be a site teacher decision.
But I just think if we're being
Yeah.
really careful about definitions, we should take it the next step of, is this what we mean?
We hadn't discussed dances, like middle school dances, right? That kind of thing. And I would have to check in with our middle school leaders. So let's gather that input to see what they're doing. I'm assuming they don't want the phones at those dances, but every parent wants to know where their kid is when they're not at home at 6 p.m. or whenever the dance is. So,
And you might not have a pocket at a dance, and you don't want to deal with
Right.
backpacks and where they're stored at a dance.
So,
So, yeah.
yes, maybe there's some additional and other ideas you have in terms of adding to school day to add clarity versus instructional time. That's good. We'd have to do some more work on that.
Okay, anything else? All right, well, you have something else, Kim?
I just want to say thank you for the dialogue because this is the conversation we've been having with the community. And I think everyone just brought up a lot of the parts of the discussion, the care that we take to allow kids to live in the world that's different than the one that we grew up in, but also to really help them to see, the parameters around it and help them do it healthy and in a way that they're going to be thriving in their own. And so just thank you for all of these points. I know our team has been taking notes and then we can, share those revisions together.
Well, thank you both for all your work on this, because I know it's an important issue and it's something that we needed to do. And I think you've come up with a good balanced plan. So thank you. This was an informational item, so we don't have a vote on it. It'll be brought back to us. So with that, unless there's anything else, we're adjourned. We will be going back into closed session, but we will not be returning tonight.